I'm Carol Dixon, and thank you for joining us for a Federation webinar. This is one of our series that we're doing with the Department of Behavioral Health and the YES project. So through several months, we have spread across a variety of topics that are specific to the youth empowerment services and the new system of care that's being rolled out in the state of Idaho. So today we're focusing on person-centered planning and coordinated care. And we have with us our standard trainers who are doing like a great job, that have a lot of information that they're going to bring to you. What's really important to us in doing this series is that we have Janet Hecky, who is representing the parent voice. So she brings to this presentation a lot of what is important to the parents. How do things work? What does it look like? How is this going to affect my family and I? And then Jennifer Barnett is our clinician from the Department of Behavioral Health. And so she brings to us the information of this is how it works, this is what you can expect, and she'll be able to answer a lot of those questions. So I'm going to turn it over to both of the ladies. We are doing this for July. August, we're taking a break. In September, we're going to be back with a topic that's really specific. It's more kind of a conversation of what does it mean when you have a child who's been diagnosed with an SED, a serious emotional disturbance. So put that on your calendar. We're not explicitly for sometime in the month of September. And with that, thank you very much for joining us again. We appreciate having you all here and the information that you're going to provide. There is an opportunity, and I think Janet can explain to you the opportunity to ask some questions so you can get some real specific information if it's not covered or if it's not something that you completely understand. So please use that opportunity to kind of email or text in for that. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So I did want to just start off. Again, my name is Janet Hecky, and I am with the Parent Network. And if you do have questions that you would like us to answer during this webinar, you can email them to me. That's why I have my phone here. You can email them to me at PN for Parent Network, PN Region 4, so PNREGION, the number 4, at gmail.com. They'll come to my phone here, so if you all see me referring to my phone, it just means we're probably getting a few questions in. So.
Wonderful. Thanks, Janet. And my name's Jennifer Barnett, and I'm a clinician with the Division of Behavioral Health, here to talk to you about person-centered planning and really coordinated care delivery in the YES system of care. And so our focus today, and hopefully what you can expect to learn from today's webinar, would be what coordinated care delivery in the YES system of care, what to expect with that type of service delivery, what the definitions of person-centered planning is, core elements of person-centered planning, as well as the requirements and outcomes that families may experience with person-centered planning. To start out, let me see if I can get my slide going in here. There we go. So to start out with coordinated care, when I was asked to present this information for you guys today, I really wanted to think about what is that coordinated care based from. And we really have to go back to the principles of care in the YES system of care. And one of the 11 principles in the YES system of care is collaboration. In this new system for children and families, that in a collaborative manner that is throughout all facets of the system, families really can experience through the Child and Family Team Process, or CFT, that the family will experience coordinated care. That through collaboration, connecting with other providers that may be involved with that child and family, teachers, other school professionals, maybe even a personal friend or neighbor of the family, that pulling all of those members together into a teaming process, that families will experience a different system of care for them and their child.
So Jennifer, this sounds like this is quite a change from what I experienced going through the system myself, where families now, it used to be that we had each of our providers was separate and they had separate plans, and we coordinated much of what was going on. And it sounds like that by going through these principles of care that are pushed throughout all the aspects of this new system, that this coordinated care, this ability to collaborate with everyone, is something that is really going to impact how services are coordinated and delivered now.
Correct, Janet. I think maybe what you've, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe what you experienced for your child, and your child was involved with the different systems, was a really fragmented system. And in the system of care, there's a strong emphasis on getting all of the different systems, school or perhaps juvenile justice if your child and family is involved in it, as well as mental health or the child and family services. Get everyone on the same team together and really supporting what the family's vision and desires are that they would like to see different for their child.
So this should really make a big difference for families, because not only do we have everyone talking and coordinating together, but they're all working towards those same goals, and it's not incumbent on the family or the parent alone to coordinate all those different things. So families today, you should see some of how this coordinated care and this collaboration is implemented within the systems that we'll talk about today.
And just to add on further is that collaboration is also part of the practice model. So in the new YES system of care, there's a strong emphasis on really changing the way that we practice. If you're a school teacher or you're a mental health professional, of changing how you will interact and how you will think about those children and families that may be coming into your system. And so coordinated care delivery may look different across the YES system of care. You may hear words such as a child and family team, person-centered planning, or even wraparound. And in all of those ways of delivering care, it's this coordinated effort between all of the individuals that the family really feels to be important in their child and family's life. So really in this coordinated care delivery, that the family's strengths and their needs are at the heart of what the team would be working on, and that the youth and family are engaged in all aspects of care. So it's from the beginning all the way until the end of that care that's being delivered, the family is an active participant in that care. At the center of the YES system of care is that collaboration is in the YES, the principles of care, as well as the practice model. And when a team effort is going on, that everyone is going to be developing a plan that really turns that child and family's dreams into reality. So it's focused on what they would like to see different for them and their theory of change. And it's also a way to discover really how a person wants to live their life, instead of it being fragmented, siloed about here's me in the mental health system, here's me in the school system, etc. It's about this is my life and how I'd like to be able to live it.
Which is a great change, because I know as a parent we've been so deficits focused and focused on what's wrong and fixing what's wrong in those individual environments. But really this is an effort to move families to look at having the end result being a successful functioning human being, son and family, or daughter and family, or for the entire family to be able to function together. And in order to do that, we've recognized that we have to collaborate to make the functioning work across all environments that person's going to interact with.
So since there are several types of coordinated care in the YES system of care, today we're going to focus on person-centered planning. So I wanted to, if we could get to the slides here. There we go. I'd like to, there we go, to give you the definition of what person-centered planning is. So the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare define person-centered planning as a planning process directed by the family or the individual with long-term care needs. It's intended to identify the strengths, capacities, preferences, needs, and desired outcomes for the individual. The family or individual directs the person-centered planning process, and it includes participants freely chosen by the family or the individual who are able to serve as important contributors. So really that family is going to select who they want to be part of the person-centered planning team and who they want to be as members and supporters for them through that planning process.
So, and we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a person-centered plan and a CFT, a child and family team, and wraparound. But for families who haven't gone through this before, and I have to admit I haven't been through this process before, how is a person-centered plan different from, say, the service plan that we've developed. I know even with my child with a developmental disability, we've developed service plans. And it sounds like there's at least some overlap, if not some similarity, or even with an IEP in the school system. How is this different, either in how it's utilized or in its function or where it's used?
So a person-centered plan, once it is developed, it's really focused on that family's vision, what they would like to see different for their child. But it also, the team, when they come together, they identify a mission statement of what that team is going to do, how they're going to end up accomplishing that vision for the child and the family. And so an individual plan, say that there's mental health services involved for this child and family, that mental health provider will have their own individual treatment plan and conduct their services they need to, and have the goals focused on that specific service that will be occurring for that child and family. The person-centered plan will have onto the plan all those services and needs that need to get implemented as well as addressed for that child and family. So if they need certain mental health services, those services will be on that person-centered plan. Or if they maybe need to get connected with some different resources, then maybe there would be another service that would be able to support the family in getting connected to resources on that person-centered plan. So it covers more than just a specific type of system. So if they have mental health, school, juvenile justice involved with them, all of those areas will be addressed and touched on that person-centered plan.
And then if a child is a dual diagnosed child that has some kind of a developmental issue, maybe it's autism or maybe something else that goes along with their mental health, are those covered on there? Like, say they might need occupational therapy or they might need speech therapy. Are all of those covered under that person-centered plan as well?
So currently, the system is operating that we are doing this coordination or collaboration with those other systems. And if they have a specific plan and certain requirements that need to be filled by their rules that govern them, then we would be collaborating with them and making sure that there's a golden thread between the two different plans. So in your instance, or bringing up the developmental disabilities, that the person-centered planning facilitator is doing a high level of coordination with the developmental disabilities case manager or the person that is involved with that child's developmental disabilities plan. And so they're coordinating to make sure that all of the required elements are on those plans, but that they're not competing against each other, and that really the family is understanding how they intersect and how the services are going to be delivered in a coordinated manner.
So will the families then still have two separate plans, one for the developmental issues and one for the mental health issues?
There may be two separate plans that
they're coordinated together, but the parents could have to go through two separate planning processes at this point.
At this point, we're trying to avoid that. And so if it is a family or a child that is experiencing developmental disability issues, most of those families through the person-centered planning process are starting their planning process through the developmental disabilities service system. And then there will be a children's mental health clinician supporting them for the mental health portion.
Okay.
So again, it's that collaboration together to coordinate the care.
So still some work to do to get that to where it's just a very easy, one fluid process.
Correct.
But we're working on that.
Correct. Okay. Correct. It's in transition. Yes.
Okay. So more to come on that.
Some
later?
more to come, and really that's fitting with the person-centered planning definition through Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. Is that the family or the participants in that planning process, we really want to identify and access a personalized mix of those services. So being able to coordinate the care together, collaborate so that the outcomes are really fit with that family and that child. So again, it's not siloed and different and competing in terms of those plans.
That'll make it much easier on parents as this comes together as one plan eventually.
Correct.
Will make it much easier on families to not have quite so many.
Correct. And so, I think really now I'd like to kind of look at kind of some of those core elements of that person-centered plan. And these really are elements that are consistent with the principles of care and the YES system of care, as well as the new practice model.
So Jennifer, before we move into that, and I think you probably have this covered somewhere else, but we're focusing a lot here on person-centered planning. And I know you and I had talked beforehand about there being different ways in this system that we collaborate and coordinate, and not everyone is going to have a person-centered plan. So can you take just I know you're going to get into it in a minute, but could you just explain real briefly for families some of the different ways that we can have coordinated care and why we're focusing mostly on the person-centered planning for this one?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, there's several ways in which coordinated care can occur in the YES system of care. And at the very basic level is that every family and child will have what's called a child and family team. And that's anyone entering into the YES system of care, that they're going to have that coordinated work between their primary caregiver. If it's through the mental health system, it'll be with a mental health provider. And they're going to be supporting that family by pulling together a team of the individuals in that child and family's life who are important and can be supportive in that process of them moving through that care system.
And a child and family team, that's something that every family that is accessing mental health services will have a child and family team.
Correct.
And it may be something that's small if someone has maybe less of an issue, or their issue is focused in one area so that maybe they only need a therapeutic intervention. So the child and family team in that case might be quite small, but in some of the more complex cases where we touch multiple systems and there's multiple different types of medical professionals involved, that child and family team could be much, much larger.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's really dependent upon the needs that the family and the youth identify, as well as when individuals enter into the YES system of care, a CANS, or Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths tool will be completed on that child. And so based on the needs that are identified in that tool and that discussion that happens with that family and the child in relation to that tool, then that's really going to drive and generate really how intensively involved of a teaming process or planning process that child and family needs.
So all families can expect coordinated care through the child and family team, and all families will have a child and family team.
Correct.
But only some families will have a person-centered plan, and that is dependent on how they accessed Medicaid for their services. So, and we'll talk more about the access and who is involved in person-centered planning and when you would or would not need a person-centered planning a little later. But I did want to make people, help them understand that while the themes that we're talking about here about the collaboration and the coordination, everyone in the system will receive through the child and family team, which we've talked about in other webinars. This one is more specifically focused on those families who will be needing a person-centered plan.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
So.
Well, and just to mention the other webinars, we talked about the CANS assessment in the May webinar, and I believe there's a webinar about access as well.
David and I did a webinar on access.
Correct.
And there'll be more coming, but I did want families to understand
Yes.
as we're going through this, and we'll touch on all the elements of it.
So let's start with our elements of person-centered planning. Get the slides up here. Nope, that's not it. There we go, core elements. So when a family comes into the YES system of care and they begin to work with a person-centered planning facilitator, you may experience the following core elements, because they're key and central to person-centered planning. The primary one that really fits with the principles of care and the practice model is that person or the youth and family engagement with the system. That it is really, the PCP process really encourages the development and maintenance of meaningful and respectful relationships between all child and family team members, including that person-centered planning facilitator. The youth and family are the primary members and collaborate with community providers, system providers, and natural supports. And that person-centered planning facilitator is really kind of that central point person to connect with those system partners or other team members that family identifies to be important to them.
So Jennifer, what happens then if we end up with a child and family team that has one or more members that makes the family very uncomfortable. Conflict is not unusual in situations where you're dealing with very high stress, very intense situations. So do the parents have options about who's involved in that child and family team? I know you said it was kind of run them and they're their core, but sometimes there aren't other options.
Sure, and relationships are a very dynamic thing. So someone that the family felt could be supportive to them at the beginning or the outset of the person-centered planning process, and some things have changed and the family doesn't feel that they're as supportive, or they would like to change the composition of their person-centered planning team. The family has the right to be able to do that. And so it's really up to, again, the family as to who is, or what it comprises that team, and who they would like to be there to be supportive.
So is there help? Are there people that are helping the family facilitate this? Are they, do they have training? Are they skilled in helping in some conflict resolution? Because sometimes there are people you can't get rid of. I mean, you might have a situation with a divorce where, they don't necessarily get along anymore, but it's critical for them to be there. Or you might not have an option for, in some areas of the state, there aren't that many options for the type of, for therapists or for doctors or things like that. So is there assistance in those kinds of cases where there aren't really options to just boot somebody off the team?
So the person-centered planning currently in the YES system of care is conducted by the Division of Behavioral Health clinicians, and all of them were trained in person-centered planning. So that also includes the ability to support the team or the child and family team to be able to resolve any conflicts that arise out of that planning process. And so that is also one of the federal requirements, is that that person-centered plan that is developed through that teaming process has to clearly indicate how is this team going to resolve any conflicts that may arise out of the planning process.
So that would be I can see that being very helpful. There are many occasions when I think I could have utilized some assistance in those.
Absolutely. And so going on to that, the next core element for person-centered planning is that it's really on that person-centered planning facilitators, it's their job to really familiarize themselves with you and your family. It's, again, that developing those meaningful connections and relationships so that families aren't alone in this planning process, and they really have the support to carry them through from that assessment to the end of that treatment episode. So youth and families will experience a facilitator that really strives to get to know them and really understand what their story is, what brings them to this planning process, and what those needs are that need to be addressed. And this is also a very strengths-based system of care. It's really focused on that. And so not only do we look at what are the needs of that family, but then also what are the strengths that that child and family has to bring to the table, and really support a plan that adheres to their vision and what they'd like to see different for their child and family.
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I know in my own experience, I had a service coordinator. We didn't obviously have these facilitators when I was going through the system, but we had a service coordinator that really got to know our family and our whole situation because we had multiple issues. I have a child with an extreme developmental issue. I had a child with a mental health issue. We had another child besides. And her ability to understand and really know what our family was going through and what our family needed, and to really see a lot of our struggles, really enabled her to make a huge difference in recommending some services for our family that we didn't know existed. And that made a big difference. But one of the other things you just touched on here is this idea of strengths. And I know for families who have been in the system up to now, it's always been a deficits-based situation, right? We've looked at what's wrong. And that's, from a parent's perspective, that's so easy to do, right? Because you just want things to go more smoothly. You want them to function a little bit more easily. You want to not be so worried that your child is not going to be successfully adulting at some point in their life. So we tend to focus on the crises and on what's wrong and on making things go more smoothly. So why would we want to focus on the things that are going well, or the things that our child does well, when how is that going to impact making all this other stuff happen more easily?
Sure. So it sounds like your question is really about how do we end up blending the needs and the strengths together, and what would be the purpose behind that?
Yeah.
We know from research, and this is also a cornerstone of the YES system of care, is that when we focus on strengths for a child that is multi-system involved or has mental health needs, when we know that we focus on the strengths, what's going well, it's easier to be able to look at and identify ways to be able to address the things that maybe aren't going so well. Because if we couple one of those strengths that that child and that family has with a need that ends up being identified, change can end up happening. And so we're utilizing the CANS tool, Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths tool, as well as this person-centered planning process and the familiarization that that person-centered planning facilitator utilizes to get to know that family, that they're really going to be able to understand what that family's ideas of change are for that child, but then also know how to be able to pull the two together, the needs as well as the strengths, and come up with a course that family needs to take to be able to see change happen.
So, I mean, I can see a situation where a family's going, has son Johnny, and Johnny melts down, and Johnny maybe, beats up the family or bolts from the house or whatever. But Johnny's a great cook, right? How does Johnny being a great cook help? Like you were saying, you said you could use a strength to help, make the needs him more functional in those area needs. Is that an example you can use maybe to?
So I think that person-centered planning team would end up looking at times when the needs are not happening, if we want to say behaviors, that may be the result of a need. So really trying to understand what is behind the behavior, right? And everyone isn't doing those behaviors all the time. Out of a 24-hour clock, everyone is not behaving those negative behaviors or what the family identifies as their needs related to behavior. They're not doing it 24 hours a day, every single second, every single minute. So there's time periods when people are experiencing successes. And so being able to pick apart what those times look like and really have an understanding of how to be able to support somebody when someone's doing something good and that they feel good and are responsive to it. If we can do more of that, the less likely you're going to have some behaviors. But it's also connecting what is the behavior that gets identified by that child and family, what is that need behind it that they really have at the heart of that need, and really, how is that connected with the positive things? So if cooking is a strength for a child, what does that bring to them? And if it brings them confidence, if it brings them a sense of enjoyment and fun, let's do more of that, so that when they are having some of those struggles, that they can be able to get out what's behind that and be able to move more towards doing the things that bring them enjoyment.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's twofold. It's about understanding the big picture, because without understanding why something works some of the time, we don't necessarily understand why it's not working these other times. But then also giving that child and family the opportunity to focus on something that is positive, because we do spend so much time focusing on the things that are negative, that everyone needs to feel good about some things that are going on in their lives, and being able to build those strengths up does give a child maybe more self-confidence, more understanding, and maybe a little more ability to deal with some of the things that are more struggles in their lives.
And I think when we talk about like what is when a family's trying to work through some of these issues, and they get connected in the person-centered planning process, and they start going through that teaming process, and they see that, we're looking at these needs as well as these strengths. Well, what does that mean? How does that translate into this being a plan that is going to direct me towards my vision? And the next, core element is that in the person-centered planning process, there's clear decision-making that occurs and action planning. So it's not only identifying what that need is and what the strengths are, but what does that translate into action steps? How is this going to end up being completed? And really, family in that person-centered planning process with the support of the facilitator, you're going to explore all the key areas of your concern, your needs, including those areas of concerns, for those that might be participating in that teaming process with you. If you have a larger team for the person-centered planning, what might be the needs that or concerns that are identified by the school, for example, or developmental disabilities? How can we bring all of those common things together and as a team really come up with some decisions about what maybe services need to get put in or how supports can be helpful to this family? And so your teaming process, you'll have the opportunity to come up with agreement on what are your priorities, what's the most important thing to work on, which options are to pursue. So each family comes away from that teaming process or planning process with what are my options out there, what can I choose from, but then also what actions will be included and who's going to be taking care of those.
So what happens if I feel outvoted? What happens as a parent if I'm sitting at the table and the teacher or the probation officer or the therapist or the other professionals, other people with initials after their name other than MOM, what if they all feel like we really need to focus on this need? It was identified in the cans and this is really where we need to be, and as a parent I'm going, you know what, I don't really give a flip about that, because if this doesn't stop, I can't function.
Right.
Like I can't get out of bed in the morning, my whole world stops. Or I don't really see the reason, I don't really care about that. This is more what I care about. There's going to be times, I think, when the parent's dead on and has identified maybe something, and it's not a linear thing. I know with both my child with a developmental disability and with my son with a mental health disorder, it was like this, right? And sometimes they had skills that were up here, and so it wasn't a linear thing. Correct. So what do we do when we're not all in agreement about that? And I feel like, well, we have to do that because that's what the professional says we have to do.
So like I said, I mentioned a little bit earlier that through that person-centered planning process, that there's a requirement that that plan demonstrates how that team was going to resolve conflict. So if everyone on the team is not in agreement as far as what's going to be prioritized and worked on first, then that plan is not finished until that agreement has been made. But the plan is also reviewed as definitely the CANS is completed at every 90 days. And the plan can be reviewed and updated when the family desires it to be reviewed and updated, or there's significant changes from that CANS tool to indicate that there's improvements, or maybe that things are not working as was previously planned. So as that family needs to make any changes or updates, then it can be adjusted.
So we're meeting about every 90 days then, and more often if needed?
Correct.
So initially when you're getting things set up, it may be that you try something that's new, that's kind of out of the box you hadn't thought of trying before. And you can come back and say, no, that's really stressing my son out, or it's really, wow, we've seen changes in these other areas and I didn't expect that. And that's Correct. The kind of thing as a team that it's a living document. And
it's up to the team to really decide what that review or that update looks like. If the family is like, I've got too many appointments, I just need to do it over the phone, that's fine. We get that put into the plan, and that's what's identified as to how that team is going to review it. The clinician or that completes that CANS update, the individual that will do that will schedule a time to meet with the family and to provide that update. It's not a complete redo of the original CANS tool. Right. It's actually, okay, tell us what's changed for you and your family.
Right, and then the person-centered planning process updates off of that. So
Correct.
Is that another thing where parents could say, can we just do a conference call on, Tuesday at 4:30 to do this?
If the team would like to be able to do that, it needs to be documented very clearly within the plan, so there's an understanding of how agreements are made within that team.
So this is, again, one of the principles of care is that it's family-centered, and we're, as this whole thing is being developed, we're trying to take into account that we have families that have very different schedules. We have some families that have multiple children that have disabilities or SEDs. We have some families where you have, a parent that's working 2 or 3 jobs just to make things work. So this is another opportunity for the system to accommodate the real life experience of the family, because you do have so many kids that are, going to multiple therapies and multiple different activities and interactions during a week, it can be very difficult and stressful just to add another meeting on top. So I like to hear that there's the flexibility in there for families to be able to do things in a way that really works better for them.
Right. And it always works best if people can be able to have that face-to-face contact, because again, this is about relationships.
Right.
But definitely, it's a very flexible process, to where if it is supportive of the family and it's how that team identifies how they're going to proceed forward. Then
Or
it's
it can
supportive
be,
in that way.
twice a year we're going to meet as a group, and the other times we'll meet, over the phone or what, so it can be, it's
Right.
flexible that way. It does allow for as much
Correct.
face-to-face as the
Correct.
family can.
And the last core element that I've brought up here today, well, let me get my slide here. Okay, it's not quite, there we go. The last core element really is that there's a way that the person-centered planning team, and in that planning process, that they strategize the actions, and then like we talked about, that there's review that happens. And so the team together, that person-centered planning team, will develop a plan for how quickly and how easily the plan is going to become reality. Whether the plan is bringing about real change for your child, so they're going to monitor what changes are going on through that CANS tool, and whether how often you're going to meet, when you're going to meet, where you're going to meet. And really important is who's going to receive a copy of that plan. It's very important that that family walks away with an understanding of, this is the plan that my team and I have developed. The child was part of this team, and this is how we're going to move forward.
Right, and I think that's a really critical issue that you just touched on there, is determining how you do move forward with those things. I got a little distracted because we got a couple of questions in.
Awesome.
So I want to come back to that, because there was something you said that triggered a question in my mind, but I was reading this. So we have a question from Eric, who asks, who initiates the CFT, the agency or health and welfare, and does health and welfare need to be involved in the CFT? So this is back to the child and family team.
So very good questions. It really depends, I believe, as we are speaking, that there's a plan for rolling out child and family team with the community providers, behavioral health providers. Right. And so that's a real in-time, a transition that is occurring. So the currently, child and family team, or that teaming coordinated work is happening through the person-centered plan. So when that child and family team gets put out into that community provider network, it's really dependent upon the needs that are identified for that youth and family. So if through that CANS tool, it's identified that that family maybe just needs a little bit of support from that community provider, that child and family team would end up being originated from that community provider. If it is that a child needs to access Medicaid or the YES services within the YES system of care, then they would end up coming through that person-centered planning process. Or they need a more specific service that isn't traditionally covered under Medicaid. And again, this is information that's in the Access webinar that the Federation did previously. Then if they need to access the service that's not in the traditional Medicaid state plan, which is respite, then they would come through that person-centered planning process.
Or also if they're accessing Medicaid because they're above the traditional Medicaid rate of below 185, the federal poverty level, at 185 to 300%, they also have to have one. But even families who have a person-centered plan will also have a CFT.
Correct.
And what's the overlap between those two?
So it really, it may be the same members that are involved in that person-centered planning process. The person-centered plan is a one-time-of-year plan, so it gets developed at the start of them entering in through the PCP process, and it doesn't have to get updated unless it's at the year mark or the family chooses to update, and there's been significant changes through that CANS tool. The child and family team, if it is started through that community provider, that child and family team can meet as often as that family needs for it to meet. And so in their work with that community provider, if it's identified that it really is beneficial to that child and family for that child and family team to meet once a month, then they can go ahead and meet once a month.
So there's going to be more coming out about child and family team
Correct.
because the child and family team really has not started
Correct.
as of yet. We're just now moving into the phase where community providers are starting to do the cans. And I'm not sure if did that go live on July 1st?
It went July 1. Yes.
July 1. So we'll be doing a future webinar also on the CFT and
Correct.
on how those child and family teams function. But my understanding is that a child and family team is directed by the family, but they do have some kind of a facilitator, whether that's a small child and family team and it's just the one community provider, or if a child is a heavily involved case where they have multiple systems involved and multiple providers involved, there would be more of a facilitator to help coordinate
Correct.
all of that.
Correct.
And then we also had a question from Christy. She said, many professionals are a part of the PCP planning process, are busy professionals, and scheduling is very difficult. Because of this, how do we prevent this process from becoming a roadblock to a child and their family in accessing services? So it sounds like what Christy's question here is saying, not only do you have families who have very, very busy, complex lives, but you have professionals that have limited time. So how do we, if we're putting in a requirement for them to coordinate and collaborate together, how do we do that with limited time?
So I think it will be through that engagement process that the person-centered planning facilitator conducts with the family at the very beginning part of the person-centered planning process. Their part of familiarization with that family is to really understand, okay, who would you like to see on your team? And that facilitator will reach out to those professionals that may be involved and will be talking with them about what that involvement would look like. So up until July 1, there was a difficulty with getting those professionals on the teams. Fortunately, there are some real champions out there in the state of Idaho that saw the value of this coordinated care and were willing to participate in teams. Beginning July 1, there was a new service that was rolled out, which is the collaborative work that allows for professionals to be able to come to teaming processes.
Okay, so that will help professionals be able to participate because they'll be reimbursed for their participation.
Correct.
So
please consult, the Medicaid state plan regarding that and all the ins and outs regarding that new service that was rolled out.
Okay.
July 1.
And for families who are accessing Medicaid through either because they need the 1915I services, which is the respite service, or they're in the 185 to 300%. Their child and family team is started before the person-centered plan, is that correct? And then they facilitate who will be on, or dictate who will be on a person-centered planning team? Is that?
If they're the 185 to 300%,
correct.
Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah.
They may have a child and family team that was started before the person-centered planning process. If they're already identified as being able to receive Medicaid, or they have Medicaid and are part of the Idaho Behavioral Health Plan, then they have access to whatever services are in the Idaho Behavioral Health Plan. They wouldn't necessarily need to go and get a person-centered plan,
right.
Only if they already have Medicaid, are desiring to have respite as part of their service array.
But if a family did have an existing child and family team in place and needed to start the person-centered planning process, the family can say, I want these same people that are on this team on that, so that
Correct.
You're not having, one plan over here with these people, another. I mean, it kind of goes back to the old, these people know what these, don't know what these people are doing.
Correct.
So it is up to the family
Correct.
to be able to say, yes, I'd like these same people to be
absolutely.
involved. So
Yeah.
Okay, and then do me a favor then and go back to what you were the last point that you were making, and I told you made a good point.
Receiving the copy of the plan?
Oh, that was it. Yes, so you got it. So one thing I wanted to make families aware of in terms of receiving a copy of the plan, anytime you have a CANS done or updated, or you have your person-centered plan, you should be getting a complete copy of that. And it's good for families to know that you can provide a complete copy or a partial copy, partially redacted copy to anyone that you are comfortable with. But I wanted to put out there for families who, most of our children are on IEPs or 504s. And one thing just to be aware of, if you supply a complete copy of your CANS document or your person-centered planning document to your school, that becomes a part of your child's permanent record. So just keep in mind, while you might know and love every teacher and counselor and administrator that is involved with your child today, you need to be aware that that may not be the case 5 or 10 years down the road for some of our younger children here. So just be mindful of the information you share and how you share it with your school, because it does become a part of their permanent school record. And sometimes that's a great thing. For my child, that would have been a great thing, because it would allow them to see what was going on and to understand why I wanted them collaborating and helping with my child, and where the strengths were for our family, and where we had issues that we were currently working on and were identified and understood by all the professionals involved. But there are some cases where that may not be the case, and I just want parents out there to be mindful of that and thoughtful about how they share the documentation that they're getting from this, because it really is a comprehensive amount of information on your family. I always say it's like rolling up the shingles on your house and letting people see in, and anyone who has this document, they do get to see a more complete view of your family than what most of us, put out there for public consumption.
Well, and just going back to the point of it being, this is the plan that is generated from the person-centered planning process. It's really is to be a reflection of the family story. Right. So if it's not something that you want on there, it doesn't go on there. It really needs to be that communication tool that is about your story, so that if it does get shared or communicated, people have an understanding of where that family is at.
Which is really important, and we want families to be open and to share with their teaming, with the people on their team, what the realities of their life is like, because it isn't pretty and it isn't normal. I mean, we have families that go through some very abnormal things, and things that people from the outside who don't understand, who don't have the background to know that while this isn't normal for a neurotypical kid, it's not bad parenting that caused this. It's not, it may be trauma from someone else or somewhere else, or it may just be a medical mental health disorder that is causing the kinds of issues that you have. And if we're not open and honest about that with the people who are here to help us, we're not going to get the help we need. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that the community at large is not necessarily prepared for all of this information yet. Sure. And just to be mindful of how that is shared.
So the last 2 slides that I have in here, there's one here that's titled Required Elements. These are the federal requirements on a person-centered plan. I think I've got it there. And we've talked a lot about these, that it is a youth and family-led process, that it's timely. It's really important that the families are able to begin accessing their services, getting connected with and receiving the supports that they need. That it's culturally relevant, that it really addresses what's important to that child and family, what their cultural norms are, and how they, what kind of cultural considerations need to be there. That it's understandable, that it's a plan that not only the family can understand, but is understandable for others that may be receiving the plan, not only in language, but also does it need to be translated? Is it in a way that the family understands it? If there may be some cognitive challenges for individuals on that team. That it resolves conflicts, we talked about this, that there's a clear plan about how that team is going to resolve any conflicts that may arise out of the teaming process. That there's informed choices. And that it's strengths-based, that there has been some safety planning occurring. So the plan will have inherent in it a way that if families need to look at managing risk that happens there, either risk to themselves or risk to others, as well as how do we deal with the day-to-day crises that end up coming up. If it's someone starts punching a wall, there's a risk of harm to themselves as well as others. How is that, what does that team come up with, how to be able to help that child and family when there is some risk out there? And then also the plan has to show evidence of agreement, meaning that everyone in the team, most specifically the family, agreed that this was the plan that was developed and that they're going to move forward with.
So does the child have to be present for the child and family team, for the person-centered planning process?
So definitely for the person-centered planning process, that person-centered planning facilitator will work with the family to identify what that will look like, depending on the youth's needs. Maybe they can only tolerate maybe 30 minutes. And so that plan facilitator will work with the family to be able to get the information that they need to complete that person-centered planning process.
Okay.
So, and then just the last slide I have here, we just have a few more minutes and we can take some more questions. I just wanted to bring up here about really, kind of what outcomes can the family end up expecting. So the PCP facilitator and your team will identify your desired outcomes that will be strongly based upon the needs identified from the cans, as well as your strengths, as well as any maybe other family needs that weren't on the cans. They're going to support you in developing what your vision is. So what changes would you like to see for your child and family? What that team mission statement is going to be. So what that team is would like to see completed, or the final result of their teaming together. But then also specific goals and interventions. What are specific goals that they would like to see for your child based on those needs that are identified there? So from that planning process, you can expect to have some outcomes related to those components.
So I guess I have two questions for you. One is how do we make sure it's working? Like, what do we do if we're not seeing the changes, or how do we know that we're seeing the changes? Because sometimes these changes can be incremental and pretty small over a short period of time. And then the second question I have to that is, what do we do if we've identified services and supports that my child needs, but either I can't afford them, or because of the family situation I've got, maybe I have multiple children, or like I said, I'm working a couple of jobs or whatever, I can't get my child to all of these different services and supports that we say that they need.
So let's deal with that first question about, how do we measure change that ends up happening. So on that person-centered plan, if there's different services and supports that are identified there, when you connect with the provider that's going to provide that service and support, that there will be some of that incremental change will be addressed in that avenue. So if it's mental health services, whatever you're receiving from that community provider agency, they will have specific goals addressing the needs, and you may end up addressing those incremental changes through there. If in that process and working with that community provider that you find that, wow, we're just still not seeing changes. This may be not the right combination of services and supports, or they haven't, those services aren't available in my community. What do we need to do? You always have the option to be able to pull that team back together for the person-centered planning process,
Right.
and be able to look at that service array and make the changes that you end up needing. So the changes in that person-centered plan are also going to be based on that CAMS tool. So any improvements, or maybe we're not really looking at the right need, or we're not really hitting the mark with the need that's identified on the plan, the CANS tool will be assessed at every 90 days.
So you brought up another thing that I hadn't even mentioned in there. What happens if you identify a service and support that isn't available in your community? Like, this is something my child needs, but there are very remote places in Idaho that don't necessarily have the full array of services and supports offered by Medicaid. What does a family do if they need something that isn't available in their area?
Right. Well, being part of the YES system of care, any child identified with a serious emotional disturbance, they're eligible to receive any of those services. So one of the ways that families, if it just hasn't gotten to your area yet, if you're in a very remote area, is contacting Optima Idaho would be one option, because they would be able to, with a field care coordinator, get you connected, or get a way for you to be able to get the services that you need.
Okay.
You can contact the Federation. They probably have some resources to support you and get you connected. You can also contact the Division of Behavioral Health and be able to speak with either someone in your regional office or at the central office, so that we can look at what's going on and how to be able to get you connected with what you need.
Okay, and as parents, we encourage you to do that. If there is a services and support that's been identified as something your child needs and you don't have access to it in your community, I wouldn't stop with just one of those methods.
Correct.
I would call Optum and say, this has been identified, we need this service and support, it's not available in our area. do the same with Department of Behavioral Health, and definitely call the Federation.
Parent
and
Network.
the Parent Network, let us know. Reach out to us and help us, because that is one of the things that is going to be a struggle in this state, is making sure that all services and supports are available in all areas of our communities. And we had another email come in from Carrie, and she was saying, since the child has to attend part of the person-centered planning process, if that happens during the school year, do those appointments always have to be after 3:30?
It's the appointments in the person-centered planning process happen at what's most convenient and hospitable for the family. So it may be after 3:30. It may be they're able to coordinate something and have a common ground, like at a school, where they could end up meeting together.
Okay, so again, I think, Christy, I'm sorry I called you Carrie. I think, Christy, that your question really is, again, from a professional standpoint too, is how do we collaborate with professionals who have more traditional business hours? And again, there we're referring you back to the changes in the Medicaid provider manual that will allow you to bill for services and supports and attending these meetings outside of the normal business times.
Correct. And I think that just speaks to, I mean, we've talked about several ways that people can get connected with services if it's not in the area. I mean, and that's really what is one of those cornerstones here in the system of care, is that collaboration, and really breaking down those siloed and fractured parts of the system that we've been experiencing.
So if we have a person-centered planning process, and right now those are run through Department of Behavioral Health, you said, right? Mm-hmm. So if my local Department of Behavioral Health representative knows that a certain service or support isn't available in my area, are they just not going to recommend that service and support to me, so I won't even know it exists? Because I don't know what the full array of services and supports are that my child would have access to. So how am I going to know that the services and supports that are recommended are is the total list of what would be available? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would hate for someone to not recommend something because, well, your child really does need, XYZ service, but I know XYZ service isn't available in this area, so I'm not even going to mention it.
Sure. Well, some families may end up experiencing that. My hope is that they wouldn't. Because it is part of our work that we're working diligently on in collaborating with Medicaid's managed care entity, collaborating with Medicaid, collaborating with the school, the Department of Education, collaborating with the IDJC and Juvenile Justice, to be able to have a full understanding of what is out in those different areas and communities. And so my hope is that the family doesn't experience that. If there are challenges that come up in that manner, definitely contacting the Division of Behavioral Health to be able to address that. And it's a possibility that as the system is transitioning and it's really changing very quickly, that some people may not be aware of some of the new services that are coming out, or people are, communities are starting up new services within the community. So I think we might experience some of that, just a sense that we're in this huge transition period. But hopefully with our diligent work at collaborating, really working to coordinate care for families and children, that we will see less and less of that.
And also as parents, we want to encourage you, one of the best ways to help with this is to get connected with other parents in your area. So we encourage you to contact the Idaho Federation of Families or your local parent network representative. You can reach out to me at the same email I gave you earlier, PN Parent Network, PN Region 4, the number 4, @gmail.com. And I can get you in touch with your local parent network representative. We also have several closed groups around the state where parents can talk to other parents and express their concerns, their frustrations, and learn what's working for other people, mm-hmm. so that knowledge is power in this situation, and also just the knowledge that you're not alone in going through this, that your experience may seem so far outside the norm from your friends and your family, but there are other families out there, I guarantee it, there are other families in the state that are going through what you're going through. And as hard and challenging as that is, and as far off script as it feels like you're trying to parent, it can be very helpful and very rewarding to connect with other parents who have had to walk that road before. it does provide a significant amount of help. So,
Right. Well, I think that's the value of having us being able to collaborate here together.
Right.
Is that we definitely need that feedback of what's working, what isn't working, and the challenges that families and youth may be experiencing. And it really supports that collaborative, coordinated care work that we're talking about today.
And speaking of that, for youth, the Idaho Federation of Families does have a youth group too. It's called Youth Move, and I believe it's in most areas of the state where your youth can actually get in touch with
Have a
other
voice.
youth and have a voice, but also have other people who have similar experiences to them, so that they're not feeling quite so alone. And it's a good thing to be together. But this has been a great time talking with you this morning and going over all of this. And hopefully for families out there, it's been helpful for you to understand a little bit more about the person-centered planning process. And just to provide a little bit of clarity here at the end about why we said we'd get into why someone would need a person-centered planning. Again, if you go back to the access model, person-centered planning is a federal requirement for families who access services and supports that are not traditionally offered under the Medicaid state plan, or for families who would not traditionally have Medicaid but do through the waiver it's not a waiver, but through the access of the 185 to 300% of federal poverty level. If you are in either one of those two categories, where you're either accessing Medicaid respite or you have Medicaid because of in the 185 to 300%, you will be required by the federal government to have this person-centered planning process. All families will have a CFT. Some families with more intensive services will have wraparound. So you may have a CFT and wraparound, you may have a CFT and person-centered planning, or you may just have a CFT. But just to kind of clarify that for families, under what circumstances you would be going through this specific person-centered planning process we were talking about today.
Thanks, Jen.
Jennifer and Janet. Once again, a lot of information. I think sometimes it might be helpful to go back and watch a second time, because I don't know if you can absorb everything, because there's so much new terminology, so many new services that are being offered, and ways to access the service and things like that. Watch it again, share it with friends, other people that you know that could benefit from the information. Great resources you always provide. I know the Federation appreciates that, the Parent Network, hopefully some parents will be connecting that across the state. The feedback has been really substantial as far as the parents that have talked to parents that are involved in the network, and the support and information they've received from that. Ladies, we'll be seeing you again.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Take care.